Hello, my friends. We are live once again. International Leftist Coalition panel. These are my favorite panels to do. We analyze uh, the effects of U.S. empire, foreign policy, and imperialism on these panels. And you guys see the title of this video. We're gonna do a deep dive into sanctions and U.S. sanctions. I think a lot of people don't understand how destructive the U.S. sanctions actually are and how nefarious they are as well with their intentions, as I believe we're going to explain as well. But before we get into that, I know we announced yesterday we're going to be doing Monday night panels, and so we have a big change to our lineup, and CJ going to be in charge of hosting those. But we also have new members officially part of Hampton Leftists now. Kamali Rose was on our panel last night. Josanna joined us. So Josanna has been a guest on the International Leftist Coalition, but now she's officially a co-host because Josanna is now officially a member of Fred Hampton Leftist. So welcome to the team, Josanna. This is our first episode with you as a co-host. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm very excited. I love this panel, already. We have Assal, we have Peter and Kareem. As Assal always says, it's like we're sitting together as friends and talking, and that's really good. I think it won't change much from from what already it is, and I'm just very honored and happy to be part of the family. Yay.
Yeah, Josanna is the perfect fit. A lot of you guys know I found her because Rome hosts Twitter Spaces, pretty much a big chat group of leftists, a lot of communists, to be frank, are on there. We discuss a lot revolutionary acts, theory, etc., etc. I heard Josanna on there, and I'm like, oh, I immediately have to invite her on Hampton Leftists because her revolutionary spirit cannot be denied. So we enjoyed her on here. So you guys gonna see a lot more of Josanna. But anyway, back to the topic at hand. We also have Assal Rad and Peter Beattie on tonight. Kareem Batesh will join us next week. He been on these panels faithfully every single week, so Kareem to take this week off. But good to have Assal and Peter. Welcome, guys.
Yeah. Good evening.
So our topic of today, this is something I've been reading a lot on, and I mentioned a lot how Assal is one of my favorite foreign policy sources on Twitter because she talks about sanctions and the effects of U.S. sanctions on the populace. Now, I remember there was a story a while back where Biden was talking to world leaders, where he said probably one of the biggest lies I ever heard him say, and I have covered Joe Biden's lies extensively. But he said the United States is no longer at war. Do you guys remember this? And then, of course, the liberal media establishment just ran with it. For one, that didn't make sense at face value because just pulling out Afghanistan, why would you say you're out of war just because of that? So that alone, considering all the countries that we're involved in, but they also ignore the acts of sanctions, which we have levied on multiple countries as a way to starve their populace and a way to destabilize their country. And we have leaders that are actually very open about this. Even Barack Obama, Donald Trump, even directly said the reason why they put sanctions on these countries is to destabilize them. So the idea that we are ending wars when we still have these these sanctions that we put on other countries is ridiculous. Well, I want to start with Assal because I know you do a lot of writing on sanctions, and we always play the games with Iran as well. We do a lot of writing in. I just want to ask you, what do you think is the overall devastating effects of U.S. sanctions? What a lot of people miss on this topic.
Well, I think, in terms of the devastation that it causes, I mean, it devastates an economy, right? If we've lived through any kind of economic upheaval, I mean, people are pissed in the US because they can't get their Amazon deliveries in 2 days now. There's oh, it's taking so much longer. The supply chain, that's what we're dealing with. We're the most, wealthy country in the world. We're now imagine actually dealing with economic devastation. And what does that mean? That means high unemployment. That means high inflation. I mean, the sanctions under Trump's maximum pressure on Iran, and let me just mention this at the very beginning, Iran is the most sanctioned country in the world. Iran is the most sanctioned country in history. The sanctions under maximum pressure on Iran caused hyperinflation. So what that meant is their currency, their money, lost value by something like 80%. So what does that mean? What does that mean? That means what you could have bought yesterday, you can buy 20% of that now, right? That's what that means. So when people talk about this idea, first of all, there's the idea that humanitarian goods and humanitarian transactions are exempt. You hear this line repeatedly. Well, we never sanction food and medicine. Okay, well, you don't have to sanction food and medicine directly, but when you sanction the entire financial sector of a country, how do you want them to buy it? If you froze all of my accounts and you told me you can go buy food, but I have no accounts to buy them with, clearly there is a problem. So it's a lot of language play. It's a lot of, sound bites, making it seem like who is being harmed by sanctions is the government of Iran, the government of Cuba, the government in Venezuela. In reality, it's people, right? When your economy is impacted, if unemployment in the US skyrockets, who's impacted? Joe Biden? No, Americans. If you can't afford food and medicine, even when it's available, forget scarcity, right? When you can't import things, there's scarcity of those items. Just today, the UN Office of High Commission of Human Rights released a statement saying that there's a specialized medicine, specialized bandages for kids in Iran that have a skin disease that's extremely painful. Guess what they can't get anymore? Those bandages, those wrappings. So, I mean, you're talking about, people with cancer, you're talking about specialized medicines that can't get into the country. And repeatedly, you just have politicians saying, but that's not sanctioned. It's like, no one cares what it says on paper. It's what's actually happening and impacting them on the ground. So yeah, you have millions of people who've been forced into poverty, a strong middle class that has been decimated, people who don't have access to essential goods in a pandemic, no less, right? So you would think that there were international calls to lift sanctions at the beginning of COVID. What the Trump administration did is actually increase sanctions during its last year in power. And what the Biden administration did is maintain all of those sanctions. So, I mean, we can get more into the sort of
I want to add this because I also do want to thank Matthew for the super chat. Matthew said Iran more sanctioned than DPRK. I believe that's true according to Assal, but DPRK is sanctioned to death, and once again, that's something else that we got to speak out against as well, because we always talk about, oh my God, look at the North Korean people, and this regime is horrible for the North Korean people. But who do you think those sanctions are hurting the most? It's hurting the North Korean people. So there's a lot of brain rot and propaganda going on regarding the DPRK. But backing up what Assal was saying, a lot of people don't understand the human rights violations and the mass cost to humanity that is the result of us putting these sanctions on these countries in the middle of a pandemic. And this is what Assal was referring to. Now, check this out. And we see many stories like this before, but once again, the United States, we are much above the law. We don't listen to anyone else. UN experts warn sanctions jeopardize health rights. And this is regarding Iran. Swedish medical companies over compliance on Iran embargo may have put children and patients at risk. And now I'll quickly dive into this, where it says it could strip Iranians of their basic rights to health. UN experts warned Tuesday, drawing attention to the sufferers of rare skin disease. I think that's what Assal was referring to. So you guys see how these sanctions, they always want to sell it as, oh my God, it's targeted sanctions that will hurt the evil doers of said regime, even though we are 100% hypocritical on that. But do you guys see how it actually affects the ordinary day-to-day civilians in the country? I'll pass it to the panel so you guys can react.
Yeah, I mean, you brought up international law. Like I was just checking this a second ago because it's been like 20 years since I took a class on international law. But basically, like sanctions under international law are only sanctions if they are multilateral and done under the auspices of an international organization like the UN. So in several cases of US sanctions, it's not really technically sanctions. They should be considered illegal. Under the Geneva Conventions, collective punishment is illegal. And that's essentially what these are. In fact, I think the best way of thinking of them was on, I heard this discussion actually on Radio War Nerd, which is really interesting because they focus on wars all over the world throughout history. And they just pointed out simply, like, this sanctions, the sanctions that the US uses are essentially the modern form of siege warfare. In the past, if you want to take a town, city, whatever, the army feels like it can't beat your army in the field. They go behind the castle walls and you try to starve them out. You prevent any sort of food from getting in. And you just hope that they give up because they run out of food or water, or they get so diseased because they're all squeezed in such a small area that they just surrender. So this is really just a modern form of siege warfare. And sadly, international law just doesn't have any teeth. So the US government can do whatever it likes, essentially. But yeah, and it's much worse than it's so annoying to hear people talk about how, yeah, sanctions are targeted and whatnot. But people really don't understand like how powerful the US is in its sanctions regimes. Because some people say, especially when it comes to Cuba, they're like, oh, the Cuban government blames everything on the sanctions. Like, oh, that's so stupid. Like, well, yeah, I'm sure they make mistakes on their own. But people don't understand that if you have a company in anywhere, Egypt, that is trying to sell something to Cuba, and there are components that are made in Norway and Japan and Korea and all these other countries, as long as there's one tiny little component or even a bit of intellectual property that's owned by a US company, boom, you can't export it. Also, the dominance of the US over the global financial system is another huge problem. If you're a bank anywhere in the world, you just don't want to deal with the risk of financing anything in a highly sanctioned country, even if it's for something that should be allowed because it's under some humanitarian exception. You know, there's all this hubbub over the Meng Wanzhou case, the Chinese executive in Huawei who was detained in Canada. And all of the media coverage about that was about how this is hostage diplomacy because the Chinese government imprisoned 2 Canadian citizens, I think it was. But they never mentioned that the reason why the US asked for her extradition was because she was accused of lying to a US bank about Huawei's dealings with Iran, basically violating the Iran sanctions that the US unilaterally imposed, or rather the US siege warfare. So I just wanted to bring up these points. At this point, I'll pass it along to the rest.
Can I just follow up on something Peter just said? So the idea, when you say unilateral sanctions, this is the fascinating part, right? So there's a case of the US seizing an Iranian ship with oil that was meant for Venezuela. Under what? US sanctions. Since Venezuela and Iran are sanctioned by the US, that means the US can take oil that is Iranian, that is meant for Venezuela. I don't know how to explain this, but US law is not international law. We have international law, and then the United States is a country within that international community. But we impose our sanctions as if we are the law of the world. We're the police of the world, right? And just another irony of that is the US sold that oil. So that's basically piracy. I mean, if you take oil, if you, on the high seas, you steal someone's stuff and you sell it, that's basically piracy, which is actually also against international law. But the point that I wanted to draw out because of what Peter said is we don't even question the legitimacy of saying that a US sanctions violation. Why can't sovereign states, why can't China engage in trade with Iran? They're 2 sovereign states. The US should not have control over them. They are not state 51 and 52 of the United States. They are 2 sovereign countries. And yet the US steps in and says they are not allowed to do trade with each other. This is fundamentally the question we have to ask ourselves. Under what logic do we allow this to occur?
This is like the extension of like the Monroe Doctrine, where we believe we have the right to intervene in other countries. And once again, that is crazy. And there's no one to actually hold us accountable because we repeatedly team up with Israel to block condemning the blockade of Cuba. So it's like we constantly going against what other countries want to do. Every other country want to calm everything down, and the U.S. continue to drag the world to the right and imposing their sanctions, imposing imperialism and empire. And a lot of people have these real nefarious belief in the ruling class. There was a story that just came out in Politico. Now that I think about it, just to show how propagandized our country is. We always talk about propaganda. They outright said, maybe I can find that story here real soon. We're going to require all our writers to have a pro-Israel position. And they just openly admit that. I'm like, okay, so that's essentially we have state TV then. That's what you guys are bidding. And they report that as a story, as it's a good news. Like, yeah, we Politico, we actually on the good side here. We are pro apartheid state. We are pro-Israel. But these are the kind of propaganda. This is the kind of pro-empire thinking that you see go on all the time that is not challenged. Josanna, you have anything you want to chime in regarding the discussion or regarding this or anything else?
Are we going to Nicaragua? Nicaragua? Sorry,
Yeah,
I tried to have an American
Nicaragua.
accent there. It's like Nicaragua.
Yeah. So do not get mistaken, guys. The United States get involved in these other countries with sanctions in order to delegitimize the regime. And we see what they did with the Venezuela and the propaganda they put in Venezuela, where they were trying to claim that their elections was 100% delegitimate. And now they're doing the same thing in Nicaragua right now, which is why we need to pay attention, because the Biden administration is already flowing the idea that the Sandinista government in Nicaragua is going to be illegitimate, because the polls show that they are going to win. So now they're already gathering allies to claim that this regime is illegitimate. This is the same thing that they did in Venezuela as well. So the U.S. empire, that's why we had the International Leftist Coalition, is still active and ongoing. Like, it's not just theory that we're talking about. Like, we're not talking about just sins of the past. These things are going on right now. Like, I always say this to people, because whenever I talk about the CIA, I can almost feel the shit libs rolling their eyes. But the CIA has 20 active employees, and that is just the one that's on the books. Do you guys think these 20,000 employees are just sitting around twiddling their thumbs, doing nothing? This is what they do. They are the international sledgehammer. That is, they just want to promote global capitalism. That's another thing that these sanctions are designed to do, is to delegitimize these other countries. But I'll pass it to the panel. Any thoughts?
I just want to touch base in a subject that's like it's beyond sanctions, and it's part of it too. So we need to always talk about the coup d'etat in every single Central America and South American country that has elected a leftist government that's going to impose bars to the United States. In my own experience, we saw what happened to Dilma Rousseff. Once we discovered the pre-sal, the Workers' Party is holding back the exploration of that petroleum, and the US wants it. And what happens is a president that's being impeached with no crimes committed. She was taken out of the government with full support of Obama's presidency. Obama didn't say a word. He didn't say a word. And that came right after Snowden released documents saying that Obama was spying on world leaders, and Dilma had a trip here to the US to talk about the exploration of pre-sal and because her idea was to get the royalties to invest in education and public health. And she said, I'm not going to come to the US if Obama doesn't come out and apologize. And he had to. And by that time, Brazil was part of the BRICS, which was the bloc that was Russia, China, South Africa, India, and Brazil. And we had strength. We were like the fifth economy in the world. So we were thriving. And after that, a week after she said that, there was a press secretary that came out and said, well, she's playing with the president of the United States. She's going to face consequences. And then a little bit after that, the coup d'etat process started, because they just needed an excuse to take her out of power to do what they're doing today. The United States of America owns the pre-sal. They have all the royalties for the exploration of petroleum in Brazil. That said, they had the same attempt in Nicaragua in 2018. A group of right-wingers, extremists, please correct me if I'm wrong with the words, they killed many police officers because the president was like trying to build defense against them, but they were highly trained by the USA. So finally now in 2021, they were arrested and the United States has lived against them because it's like their own soldiers were arrested. So, and then you have Sérgio Moro in Brazil, which is responsible for the incarceration of Lula da Silva. Also, no crimes. Every single accusation against Lula is coming out clean right now.
They do that all the time.
Yeah, and then Sérgio Moro is the one that would be like, I was trained by the CIA. Like he was saying that like it's like some, VIP kind of pass that you get. And to me, I read that, oh, so you're doing that on purpose because CIA wants Lula arrested so they can keep on having the royalties for the petroleum that we have. So the sanctions they happen, but also as a consequence of a destruction of a sovereign country, like they did to Venezuela. Venezuela is in pieces.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm
right?
gonna get into
that
Venezuela.
country.
Yeah, well said, Josanna. Thank you for that. Because I'm gonna get into Venezuela, and I want to add this, and I'll pass it to Josanna and get her thoughts because I want to add to what Josanna was saying, and this is why we brought Nicaragua and why this is relevant when we discussing economic war, because this is how we attack governments who have ideology and pushing anti-capitalist ideology that the United States find to be inconvenient. So the U.S. Congress outlines new phase of economic attacks and hybrid war on Nicaragua's Sandinista government. It was written by Ben Noren in the Gray Zone, friends of the show. And this is an amazing article. I may edit the description so you guys can check this one out, because this article highlights how you have the United States government that works in a bipartisan way to justify sanctions against the Sandinistas. As I saw one of the commenters bring up how we've been waging war for decades against the Sandinistas, and economic war that is going on right now is just another example of that. So the Gray Zone reports a House Foreign Affairs Committee hearing on September 21st set out plans for the next phase of U.S. hybrid warfare on Nicaragua, which aims to destabilize and ultimately overthrow the Central American nation's leftist Sandinista government. So they also have an election that's going on that they already trying to claim is illegitimate. They're trying to get allies in the region to pretty much rebuke the government of Nicaragua. And Venezuela is another country that stands in solidarity. So we got to keep an eye on this, because this was a few weeks ago. This is still ongoing. The United States is still putting a lot of pressure on this country. So this is, once again, they also referring to the same pressure they put on Venezuela here. And also want to share this so you guys understand the pain and suffering that the United States sanctions have done to Venezuela. Then I'll pass it to Assal, and then we do Peter next. Once again, the UN always looks into the crimes of the United States, but unfortunately, they're just powerless to do anything about it, because there's another UN report on the impact of the U.S.-led sanctions against Venezuela, where they say it violates the most fundamental human rights. It's a fundamental violation of human rights, international law, where they pretty much did a 12-day visit looking into U.S. sanctions, looking into the blockade of Venezuela. And this is what we do. We are the destabilizer. We throw around our influence, and this has unbelievable effects on these countries. And then we turn around like, oh, look at Venezuela. Look at Nicolas Maduro. Look at how he ran his country into the ground. And if you guys wondering why we will never lift sanctions, because when we lift sanctions, people will realize it's not these leaders that are starving the people. It is actually us. it's actually us that are responsible for the destabilization of these countries. But I'll pass it to Saul. Anything you want to add to the discussion, and then Peter can chime in after that.
Well, I thought it's interesting that Josanna brought up this like history of coup d'etats in Latin America, right? Because it's not unique to Latin America. It happened in the Middle East as well. And actually, Iran was one of the early playgrounds for the CIA, which in 1953 overthrew the popular Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh. And the reason why he was popular is very simple. He nationalized Iranian oil, right? He went through the channels that were created in the wake of World War II of the international community. He went to The Hague. He went to, basically present a case that said, look, British control of Iranian oil is illegal. They can't control our resources. And because he was successful, the US and the UK overthrew him and reinstated a dictator. So it's fascinating, and because all of these are tools of empire, right? A coup is a tool of empire. Controlling what the governments in other countries is a tool of empire. Controlling their economies is a tool of empire. Going to war with them is a tool of empire. And so all of these tools brought together is why, or how I should say, we've created the most powerful entity in human history. The United States is the most powerful empire in the world. It is the most powerful empire in human history because that is the extent of its reach. It can reach anywhere in the world, and it can do so through a multi-pronged approach, right? So if you can't directly destabilize it through war, you can try to clandestinely do it through coups. If you can't do it in either of those ways, we'll just starve them with sanctions, right? We have all of these great tools at our disposal. And essentially, what we're doing at the end of the day is trying to control these other countries, which flies in the face of the entire notion of sovereignty. But I also find it ironic that a country that talks about democracy as much as it does seems to hate democracy. I mean, like, a democratic process does not mean the person you want to win wins. A democratic process is the people in another country pick who wins. And as a simple example, can you imagine if, it's hard to say because there is no comparable power to the United States, but let's assume that like there's a coalition of powerful countries that got together this year and decided, you know what, Trump is right. This was a stolen election, and decided to interfere in US politics and governance, and decided to say not only are they interfering, but they're interfering on the side of the person who is upending the notion of democracy. What would we do? We would clearly condemn it. And yet we engage in that behavior historically and consistently to this day.
That's such a powerful point. And that's the point I always trying to bring up to other people when people act surprised when I'm as anti-imperialist as I am. Because people are like, oh, why do you care so much? Imagine if obviously, like Assal said, there's not like a comparable country, but I'm like, imagine if another country had troops in our backyard. They're like, oh, we just want to make sure that democracy, that this country follows democracy, which we don't. We don't. The idea that we have a democracy is ridiculous. So, like Assal claims, you can have a country that easily come out here. They're like, look how low the voter participation is in this country. They actually have a system in this country that completely invalidates their vote called the Electoral College, where millions of people votes don't count. You have half the country don't vote. There's something wrong with the democracy. This hypothetical superpower. They're like, we actually gonna keep troops here and make sure we don't have troops in Kansas City. We're gonna have troops in Orlando. Just make sure that things going on. Imagine how we will react in this hypothetical scenario. That's why I always want to highlight the people. Peter, you have anything you want to add? And I have something else I want to share.
Yeah, I think that's the right way of thinking about it. What Assal was just saying, like, you just have this spectrum of aggressive, belligerent actions, from siege warfare, sanctions, to fomenting a coup. Before that, you just put all sorts of economic and political pressure to try to bend the government to your will. If that doesn't work, coup, outright invasion. They're all forms of aggression. And when I was thinking about sanctions / siege warfare, this quote came to mind, and it was the right pain in the right place at the right time. And I was thinking that came to mind when I thought of sanctions, and I had to look it up because I wanted to make sure that it was actually about sanctions. Turns out, no, that was actually a quote from Dan Mitrione, this really sick fuck, working for the CIA in Uruguay, maybe other places in South America. He was a torturer. He trained other torturers. He picked up homeless people off the streets and tortured them like guinea pigs. That was his definition of torture. But the reason why it came to mind was that there was a guy, Richard Nephew, who was instrumental in designing the Iran sanctions or overseeing the Iran sanctions. And he wrote a book, I think it was called The Art of Sanctions. And essentially he said the same thing, like not in the exact same phrasing, but the whole idea was, yeah, you impose a great deal of pain to try to twist the government to your will, or you impose a great deal of pain on the population in the hope that they will overthrow the government. So that's precisely the definition of collective punishment. You're punishing and imposing pain on a population in order to achieve some sort of political results and political aim. So yeah, it's modern siege warfare, and it's against international law, but the U.S. is so powerful, the U.S. government is so powerful, it can get away with it.
Nick, before you go ahead, I just wanted to say that these presidents that the U.S. wants to take out, they are comrades, and they go into power knowing that they will receive that back. And I keep on thinking like the US is like the terrorists, like they are actually training people to kill in these countries. So they are like committing acts of terrorism. And let's say that, as Assal placed the question, like, let's say that another nation started training people here, a militia. So I don't know if I can use that word in English, here in the US to start killing and what was going to happen? These people would disappear. They wouldn't do that. Like they wouldn't like have the first shot, right? They would be erased. And you can see what happened to Evo Morales, Maduro, Lula, Dilma. Pepe Mujica got like he was able to finish his mandate, but still, it's really hard for those people. But they are comrades. They were arrested. All those people that I said their names, they were arrested in the military government in the 70s that was sponsored by yours truly, USA. And I saw a question in the comments, Danny, Danny, he or she asked, do you believe the US, sorry, they asked, do you believe the US constant worldwide sanctions is overcompensation for the weakening of the US dollar? And I would say to that question, yes, I do believe that. I do believe that because this country, when they broke in 1929, the way they figure out to get out of being the broken country was to sell guns for both sides of the First World War. They were no sides, and they were just selling guns for both sides. And they money, and then that kept on growing. So all this military power, all this weaponized, extremely cruel military power is used to bully the world. Because how can I am weakening economically speaking. I live here, and I think it's not doing so well. And I have to pose as the empire still. And to do that, I attack.
Well, so I want to share this video that you sent me, Josanna. Here, I'm gonna pull it up. This
Video is the consequence of the coup d'etat that the US sponsored in Brazil. So what you have is in the Northeast, what's happening there, these are people that are jumping in the trash truck for food scrapes in a like suburb, like not like upper class neighborhood. So poor people, they have nothing to eat, and they are fighting, as you can see.
And and you said Brazil's starving people are fighting for leftover food from garbage truck in upper class neighborhood. Meanwhile, Bolsonaro is selling the country to the USA. Don't be fooled. The revolutionary is needed worldwide. And this is why you see the United States ally closely with Bolsonaro in the media made a big story about how Bolsonaro and Trump are good friends, but don't get mistaken, Joe Biden definitely prefers Bolsonaro as well. They was hiding behind the guise of Trump, but the support of the right-wing Brazilian government over any left-wing opposition, that is definitely something that the United States support. Is that right, Josanna?
Yeah. So Bolsonaro was brought as like he is like if I have any ever a chance to like you guys can have a laugh. Like he has no depth. He's extremely stupid. He's a stupid person, and he's a gangster. He kills. He's part of a group that's ex-military people that go around and terrorize a city. He's from Rio de Janeiro. They used to do that there. Now they have the presidency of the country. And when Dilma was taken from power, what the United States did was to like keep Temer, which was the vice president, and he was called by the FBI. He's like a gang chief. So like these are the people that have control. And then you have Aécio Neves, which is just like Pablo Escobar, but not so cool because he's not like a Robin Hood kind of guy. He's like upper class and he is a cocaine dealer. And then you go and you make the transition because the way, as I think Nick or Saul brought that, you're destroying the country and you make the population hate the government. And then you get a fascist crazy person that is saying, they are taking the jobs out of here. Who? Who's taking the jobs out of Brazil? I'm tired of PT, which is the worker party. They stole everything. And people were like suffering. People are starving. People already coming from a crisis that the coup d'etat originate. And they're like, yeah, this guy is like. But in numbers, Bolsonaro won for the amount of people that didn't come to vote, that didn't go to vote in the second round. Because in Brazil, you have a first round because we have many parties, and then you elect two, and then you have the second round in between those two. And the people that didn't want to vote because they didn't agree with the fact that Workers' Party was not so radical anymore, they actually helped to elect Bolsonaro. But I don't believe in electoral system. And I think Bolsonaro was the guy that the US needed in power because he will accept an amount of money and give away everything, like he's doing with the Amazon rainforest, like he's doing the petroleum, like.
Yeah, what you said regarding Bolsonaro being a gangster, I want people to understand that is on point and that is 100% true. And this is why you do not listen to the United States when it tries to lecture people about the morality of other countries, and this is why we should get involved in this country because they're evil. The people that we ally ourselves with have the moral high ground over nobody. When you look at Ivan Duque in Colombia, this is someone that the neoliberal establishment in America ally with, and we have protesters in Colombia that are protesting his violent regime. And there are professors that broke this down. I covered this on my show. It is not an exaggeration to call the regime that Ivan Duque is running as a mafia regime because he got close ties with mafia gangsters. And these are the people that our government ally with. Bolsonaro, the same as you explained. There was a big deal when you had Jamal Khashoggi that was killed under Donald Trump's presidency. And they were like, oh my God, you had the crown prince of Saudi Arabia that won't be held accountable by Donald Trump. Then Joe Biden get in office. He launches a probe investigating that affair. And that affair, and at the time, the people praised Joe Biden. They're like, oh my God, Joe Biden is looking into this matter. They looked into the matter and they were like, yeah, he definitely killed him, but we're not going to do anything about it. And now, because he did that, there are actually real consequences. Like, that's not like just a one-off thing. And I covered this on my show extensively. I can pull the receipt here soon. Actually, I'm going to pull it up. I got to say quickly. You have, like, Saudi Arabia is actually emboldened because Joe Biden was so weak on this. They were scared to death, actually, because maybe they fell for the propaganda where they thought like, oh no, because Biden was sounding tough on the campaign trail. You had Joe Biden like, oh, we're gonna hold Saudi Arabia accountable. We're not gonna be like Trump. Nope, the same thing. So this is what I'm talking about right here. The Biden administration's failure to impose sanctions on Saudi Arabia Crown Prince has led to an increase in severe sentences for political prisoners in the kingdom. So because that Biden like, yo, you can do whatever you want. We're not gonna go after you same way Trump. That emboldened him. That the United States allying with gangsters. Jovenel Moise out of Haiti. He was recently assassinated. It is notorious for ties with Haitian gangs and violence in that country. The United States supported him. That's all. Do you have anything you want to add?
Well, because you brought up Jamal Khashoggi, I wanted to say Blinken actually tweeted about him. I think it was like 2 weeks ago.
Really?
That was
What did you say? I didn't see it.
Well, it was like it was to condemn. This is the irony, right? So he's condemning the heinous murder of Jamal Khashoggi, and he doesn't name Saudi Arabia. He doesn't say anything about. So who are you condemning? Are you just condemning murder in general? So I condemn people killing other people. Well, that's great, but I don't understand why you're not naming who you're condemning. So it's a clear difference, right? Like we do not, and this is the ongoing problem with the way that we treat the world, is we're not treating the world. We use a lot of flowery language. Yeah, we care about democracy and human rights and all this kind of stuff. We don't, very clearly. We don't care about them inside of the country, let alone outside of the country. But it's just like the amount of hypocrisy is wild to watch. Like, how do you condemn someone without naming who you're condemning? And that was like 2 weeks ago.
That doesn't surprise me. Blinken praised Colin Powell. They have the same overall governing philosophy. We're gonna get into Colin Powell. I'm gonna give you guys thoughts on that very soon. But I wanted to add this. Back to the topic of economic warfare, because I want to share this from the report that I was following to you guys. I don't want you guys to have any other takeaway other than U.S. sanctions and economic war are nefarious, as like UN researchers have said many times. Hold on, let me get the there it is. I got many sources up, so I'm gonna read you guys this, and then I'm gonna show you guys a story, and this is something that has recently happened over the last week, and that's why I want to cover this on the show. And I wanted to explain to you guys the evil of U.S. sanctions before we get to this part, so you guys truly understand. So this is why the UN reported the sanctions against Venezuela as a violation of international law and human rights. So the country revenues essentially from oil exports were significantly reduced, affecting public electricity, gas, water, transport, telephone, and communication systems, as well as schools, hospitals, and other public institutions. You guys see how these kind of things that will affect the ordinary daily lives of people, right? Now, this is the important part, right? The special rapporteur concluded that unilateral sanctions against Venezuela are politically motivated, undermine the most fundamental human rights, and violate international law. That's kind of what we was referring to here. And this is why there has to be a staunch, we got to oppose this at all costs, because once again, politically motivated. They always say the United States, we want to fight on behalf of human rights. That is what we claim, even though we support the biggest human rights violators in the world, as we explained, Saudi Arabia, just one example of many. But the so-called country that speaks about human rights, there is someone who was fighting against the U.S. sanctions against Venezuela. You have Alex Saab. Alex Saab is a Venezuelan diplomat. Now, he was trying to bypass the United States sanctions in Venezuela by giving food to the starving Venezuelan people who are a victim of the U.S. sanctions. So his crime was feeding people. Now, what was the United States' response to Alex Saab, who, once again, his crime is bypassing U.S. sanctions to feed the Venezuelan people that we have starved. Venezuelan diplomat kidnapped by United States. And then the Venezuelan government had denounced the kidnapping of Venezuelan diplomat Alex Saab by the government of the United States. So they tortured Saab, kept him in prison for 491 days without arrest order, without due process. Once again, violation of Vienna Convention, a crime which has been condemned by the United Nations and countries around the world. You guys see a pattern here? The entire world see what the United States is doing, and we're like, yo, what the hell? What the fuck? Now, this is what Aaron Mate tweeted out, and I'm gonna get your guys' reaction to the story because this is something I've been reading up on recently, and it still blows my mind. And this is Alex Saab has been extradited to the United States. Once again, his crime is feeding people, the people who were starving because of the Venezuelan sanctions. So I wrote an op-ed today where I highlight all my worst fears of the Biden administration are coming true, and I have a giant segment how I said we got a new president, but same U.S. empire. Nothing is changing. Biden picking up Trump's baton, as Aaron Mate points out. Biden, just like Trump, there's no substantive difference between their foreign policy. They had kidnapped Alex Saab for the crime of trying to feed Venezuelans in defiance of U.S. sanctions designed to prevent that. Venezuelans aren't allowed to eat so long as the DC mafia has marked their government for regime change. This is political. This is nefarious. So now they are making an example of Alex Saab. You don't bypass your sanctions and help people when we're trying to throw a government. That is what the United States are doing. You guys have any initial reaction? I have something else to share as well that wraps up and explain how everything is so ridiculous here. But go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, I don't know if that UN report that you were talking about earlier had an estimate for the number of people killed by the sanctions on Venezuela, but the Center for Economic and Policy Research did a study a couple of years ago, and they estimated 40,000 people died in Venezuela as a result of the sanctions, just over a period of 2 years, I think, or maybe a year and a half. So that's 13 9/11s just in 2 years, a year and a half period. I'm sure the true figure is longer because the sanctions have been going on for longer. On the point of that article you wrote on Biden was excellent. Like there were so many things that I wasn't aware of that I learned from that. But it reminded me what you were saying about the Khashoggi affair. If you guys remember, there was a debate between Sanders and Biden during the primaries where Sanders said something like, if I'm president, I'm going to make the Saudi regime into the international pariah it should be. And then Biden jumped in and said, oh, yeah, I'm going to do the same. And that was the lie that angered me the most. And I was talking to everyone who had listened to me about it because, that's the most obvious thing that he's not going to do. And of course, he didn't do that. And then lastly, just to kind of tie a bunch of threads that each of you have brought up, like, Assal was saying there's this serious hypocrisy between the U.S. government promoting its supposed love for democracy around the world. And then, as Josanna was pointing out, like, all of the Americas have been a fucking coup breeding ground or testing ground. And then, it's really all over the world. The way that it all kind of fits together is the free world, the U.S. government is supposed to be the leader of the free world. That freedom isn't supposed to be, or isn't in reality, freedom for people, like democratic freedom, the freedom to self-govern. It's freedom for capital. It's freedom for investors to do as they wish. So when investors in British Petroleum is what the company is now, I think it was like the Anglo-Iranian oil company or something back during the Mossadegh era. When their freedom to get profits are threatened, then force is used. That is the unifying theme. The freedom of the so-called free world is the freedom for wealthy investors to make profits, for wealthy investors to control their capital, their ownership of resources, of productive equipment, factories, etc. That's the real freedom. Democracy, yeah, that's great as long as the elections don't result in someone who's going to use the natural resources of that place for the development and betterment of the quality of life for the people in that country. And if that happens, then democracy is out the window. So that's really the unifying theme. It is about freedom, but it's about freedom for investors. It's freedom for capital. And then democracy can be tolerated when that freedom isn't threatened, but otherwise it can be jettisoned.
Yeah, and according to that article, it said on Wednesday over 800 human rights organizations and social movements released a statement supporting the recent call for sanction release in Venezuela, according to the UN human rights chief. I just want to add that in. Assal, you had anything you want to chime in as well?
Yeah, I mean, you brought up the fact that there's this international call to lift sanctions. I mean, part of that international call to lift sanctions has been based on the COVID-19 pandemic, right? The fact that we're in a pandemic has really, I mean, the pandemic has highlighted so many things about the deep fissures and flaws of our society, whether it's the US or the global sort of society altogether. But that's part of what's made sanctions actually something that people are talking about. Because what makes sanctions nefarious is the fact that we present it as a benign tool. It's like, oh, look, we're not going to go to war. We're going to be really nice. We're just going to starve them to death. It's like, because the language that's used is a complete, it's all sort of a PR campaign, right? It's a way of packaging something that is extremely violent. It is very, to deprive people of medicine is a form of violence. You're killing them by depriving them of something. I mean, if I stood in a house at somebody who's sick and I took their medicine from them and I didn't give it to them, you would say I committed murder. There would be no question to this fact. So depriving people of their livelihoods, making them not be able to afford basic goods, all of that is extremely violent. And one of the things I wanted to mention is there's, we have short-term memories. So there's a lot associated with Trump, right? It's like, oh, yeah, Trump did this, Trump did that. Trump maintained a system that existed long before he did. The Cuban embargo is going in 6 decades. Trump did not do that. Trump maintained that. There's a difference. The sanctions on Iran have been going on for 4 decades. Trump did not do that. Trump maintained that. And now the narrative is, oh, you know, we're going back. America is back. Some kind of idea as if what Trump did, especially on the foreign stage, was somehow anomalous and now we're going to fix it. Well, here's an example. So in January, the Biden administration said that they were going to do a sanctions review. And now his constituents, and who are constituents? People who voted.
Hey, Saul. Yes. I actually want to get into that. I'm gonna bring that. You talking about the sanction review of the Biden administration, yeah, right? Hold that thought for 1 second. Hold that thought. I appreciate you bringing that up. I'm gonna pass it to you first because I want you guys to realize how ridiculous that is. What we're gonna bring up here soon. So I do want to bring up this because it's also backed up your point regarding the international community pretty much coming out against sanctions. And the reason why I may explain this is because I want to explain why I am so against the United States empire and why we are building an international leftist coalition so we can fight the U.S. empire, because this is something that people in the world sees as a great evil. People see the direction of U.S. capitalism. People see the direction of U.S. imperialism as a great evil. And we did an entire panel about the evils and the sexual depravity of the Catholic Church. But so to be fair, I do want to bring this up because the new Pope, who I don't necessarily have a high opinion, I don't have an opinion one way or another, he has been good on a few issues and challenging a lot of these Christian hypocrites. Now, he came out recently with a statement essentially condemning global capitalism and global U.S. imperialism. And he also massively condemns the sanctions, what we are talking about right now. So I'm gonna read his statement. So once again, I believe I can be nuanced. We have a lot of criticism of the Catholic Church, But this is good. What the messaging that this new pope is putting out is good inherently. I don't know if he's a hypocrite, but I care about the messaging first and foremost. So this is his plea. I'm gonna read this out, and I'm gonna get to the story of Saul. I think this is very relevant. He says, in the name of God, I ask financial groups and international credit institutions to allow poor countries to assure basic needs of their people and to cancel those debts that are so often are contracted against the interests of those same people. I also do want to highlight that usury laws that the capitalist class have has embraced, right? They put an entire working class into debt. That is something that is strongly against the religious tenets of the Catholic Church, of Protestants, of Judaism. This is something that capitalism has blinded religious people of caring about. It actually spoken about in the Bible a lot. You're not supposed to have debt and wage slavery like we do now. But anyway, I'll continue with the statement. But that's why he says that. He says, in the name of God, I ask arms manufacturers and dealers to completely stop their activity. This him essentially calling the end of militarism, the military-industrial complex as we know it. He said, I ask manufacturers and dealers to completely stop their activity because it foments violence and war. It contributes to those awful geopolitical games which cost millions of lives and displace millions of lives and leaves millions dead. Right? So this is already powerful. And I'm going to give you guys a reaction here very soon. But this one is, the next paragraph is the one that's relevant to this discussion. I argue all of this is relevant, but he says, in the name of God, I call on powerful countries to stop aggression, blockades, and unilateral sanctions against any country, anywhere on earth. Any country, anywhere. Not except socialist countries. Not except Venezuela, not except Russia, any country. No neocolonialism. Conflicts must be resolved in multilateral fora, such as the United Nations. We have already seen how unilateral interventions, invasions, and occupations end up, even if they are justified by noble motives and fine words. So once again, that's a great statement by the Pope. And this, you have conservatives, neoliberals that are in shambles, like especially ones who are loyal to the Catholic Church. After he sent this message and many other, he sent out a lot of messages that directly contradict neoliberal capitalism. But this one was very strong, very direct, and here he directly rebukes sanctions. Do you guys have any reactions? Then I want to get to the next part of this. I'll open the panel real quick.
I mean, I was just going to say he just sounds like an anti-imperialist, right? Like that.
He sounds like a crazy. He sounds like a crazy Antifa, far leftist, radical. Anyway, I'm gonna move on to the next one because this is what Assal mentioned. So I think
he sounds like an actual Christian, which is weird to hear from a pope, you know.
Yeah, I have said many times I don't have faith, and I said many times, like, even though I had a lot of criticisms of religion, the way people maintain a religion, when you listen to people like Dr. Cornel West, right, who's really religious, I have no problem. In fact, I find his faith to be very inspirational in a way, you know what I mean? But then you have people who use the religion to, like, oh, we're gonna discriminate against gay people. We're gonna call for crusades and the death of people who believe in things different than us. And you think I'm being over dramatic? That is literally what the invasion of Iraq was. George Bush told him, the Christian God told him to invade Iraq. These are the things that they used to help sell the war. So if you think the Crusades have ended, they have not. The Crusades have never ended. Like that, people always like, that's in the past. No, it's not. It's not. You understand? Noam Chomsky wrote about this in great detail. Someone once asked him, why are there so many Zionists in America? Well, even though America is a mostly dominant Christian country, why are there so many Zionists? And once again, this does not come from me. This comes from Noam Chomsky. Noam Chomsky said people underestimate the evangelical hold that is on many Americans, where they see Israel as the place where the the rapture is going to take place and where Jesus is going to come back. So a lot of these people who support the apartheid state of Israel, they do so because they want to purge the Muslims from the area, the undesirables. Once again, coming from Noam Chomsky, not me. That's a giant reason. That's no different than the Crusades. So go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, and that's the majority in terms of a numerical majority of the support for the Israeli government in the United States is from evangelical Christians who believe that once they ethnically cleanse all the Muslims from the Holy Land, then Jesus is going to come back and he's going to massacre all the Jewish people and everyone else who isn't like a member of their exact sect. And so, that's the majority numerically of the support for the Israeli government in the U.S.
There is a church that's called the Universal Church, is an evangelical church, and every time I entered, I saw a temple because they have these massive temples with like place for helicopters, hotel, like it's a hotel inside a church temple. Every time I went in, I saw that the people there were supporting, the people that were paying for these massive temples were people that can barely afford food. And the presence of evangelicals in Brazil, it's coming to an extreme point. They hold in the House and Senate more than they are 70%. They are 70% in both. And this is like so worrisome because like the excuse of like, I am going to save you. This is always a fascist excuse because like, what are you saving me from? Did I ask to be saved? They do the same thing in the continent of Africa. But there is one good thing about that. They were kicked out of Angola because the president said like, you're abusing people's faith and kicked them out. But they have this domination. The Crusades still happen. And I think right now, I think we live in this really weird moment where we see things with our eyes and they don't care that we are seeing anymore. They're just doing it. And if we try to go, because like when you spoke about freedom, Peter, I thought about because there's no freedom here, right? It's a dictatorship. We in the US live in a dictatorship. And I'm like, where is this freedom? I really want to find it. There's no freedom. And the empire keeps on attacking, conquering. And before, in the name of God, and now just in the name of the name, of the coin, of the power.
Well said, Josanna. And I want to say this because this has always been my take on religion. I want to call bad ideas what they are. I don't care if you get offended or whatever, but I don't think religion makes you inherently good or bad. I think religion amplifies who you already are. If you're a good person, you will use your religion in a good way to benefit humanity, and you will say your religion led you that way. And then if you are a bad person, you will use your religion to do bad things and use your religion to justify that. The same way that former extreme racists used to use their religion to justify slavery, the way they used to use that to justify lynching. So that's people who are bad who will use their religion to justify doing bad things. That's why I think it's super important to cover what the Catholic the Pope has been saying, because it exposes the people who use their religion as a shield to pretend they're good people, even though they're just propagating more bad. So we heard what the Pope has said regarding sanctions and economic war. Now I'm gonna pass it to Assal here very soon, because I think Assal was going to mention this, because this is something the liberal establishment, they always bring up regarding Joe Biden. They're like, no one talk about Joe Biden's faith. Joe Biden's a Catholic, a staunch Catholic apparently, and they always bring that up. Oh, Joe Biden's a staunch Catholic man. He's staunchly religious. This is your Pope, Joe Biden, telling you your foreign policy is an act against God. Are you going to listen? No, because once again, as my thesis told you guys, the religion do not dictate whether you're a good or bad person. And I think even if you're religious, I don't think that should offend you, because if you're a good person, you use your religion for good, right? So despite all of us saying that, despite the Pope flat out like rejecting his ideology, you had the Biden administration. I'm gonna pass it to Assal so she can kind of explain, because I interrupted her because she almost got to it. Because I wanted to build the argument first. Now, over the course of this last hour, you guys realize why sanctions are ridiculous and why sanctions are violent. But correct me if I'm wrong, Assal, but you had there was holding hearings. So you said, this is your tweet. You said the Biden administration put on a show just to argue that sanctions are an effective tool. There you explain that we've been explaining for the last hour. In reality, sanctions are effective at starving and devastating millions of people, while state actors stay the same. It doesn't matter if it's Republican or Dem. Sanctions are warfare by another name. Now I'm gonna share this video. I'm gonna play this video, and then I'm gonna start with you, Saul. I'm gonna mute my mic real quick, and you can explain what they was doing to get more background, and go into your spill. But I'm gonna.
Mr. Adeyemo, with respect to my time being limited, I may already be over my time. What I'm asking is for you to identify, we're trying to learn lessons here. You've conducted a review of US sanctions policy. You've identified in that review specific success stories. Please, with my remaining time, identify one or two specific examples where US sanctions policy has been ineffective, so that the Congress can benefit from the review you've undertaken and deliberate how best to improve the statutes that govern these policies.
Senator, as I said, the review was focused on the idea of us looking into the future as to what we can do to use sanctions going forward. We did not spend time looking at the individual sanctions policies. More than happy to follow up with you and your staff to talk about any of the sanctions programs that you would particularly like to discuss. But our goal of the review was to look at what we could do going forward to make sure that sanctions remain an effective tool. In order to do that, we do need to address the challenges that the review found, which we have clearly articulated both in the report and I've done in my testimony today, in order to make sure that going forward this tool is effective.
Yeah, Mr. Adeyemo, we will need to meet in person, because the purpose of this hearing is a policy update on the Treasury Department sanctions policy review. And if we're unable in a public setting to articulate or discuss any specific cases where US sanctions policy has been ineffective beyond generalities, then I think we have more work to do. So I look forward to meeting with you so that we can work together to improve US policy. Thank you.
I don't even know if you guys understand how ridiculous that was that we just watched. Saul, do you want to give a little background? I have a lot to say, but Saul, you sent that great tweet out highlighting the hypocrisy. There's so much ridiculousness out that clip. But Saul, you want to give some background in case anyone a little bit lost here?
So first, honestly, like, great for Senator Ossoff for actually saying something, right? It does show you that there are members of Congress who are at least a little bit more honest about our policies, and that they actually have the power to question those things publicly so that the public can be informed of what's going on. So hats off to him for doing that. Most of the questions that were asked were non-challenging, right? So if you never challenge what an administration is doing, then nobody ever knows what's going on. So basically, when the Biden administration came in January, they were like, okay, we're going to do this sanctions review. And his constituents, so people who supported him, voted for him, got him into office. What was expected of that sanctions review? I mean, let's put it this way. Ideally, what we would have gotten was a fundamental overhaul of a system that is clearly ineffective, targets innocent people, and basically devastates them, right? That would be an ideal situation. That's ideal. Fine. At the very, very least, what was expected was for humanitarian impacts to be central to the sanctions review, especially in light of the pandemic. This is what we got, okay? So this was in January. It's been 10 months. It took them 10 months. It's a 7-page document. Well, it's 9 pages, but the first page is blue and the last page is blue. So it's 7 pages of text. 10 months got us 7 pages of text that doesn't mention COVID once, nothing about a pandemic. So we're talking about sanctions in the middle of a pandemic, and this review failed to mention COVID at all. There is one, possibly 2 paragraphs about the humanitarian impact, and that comes somewhere in like page 6 of this sanctions review report. And you heard Adiamo say himself, we did not look at specific cases. Well, great. Then what was the point of your review? The point of the review essentially was to say that sanctions were, oh, look, our sanctions are really good. They're very effective, but we need more multilateral sanctions, right? Because we need more support on them. Really, it was just a way of saying that we are distinct from Donald Trump because he unilaterally did stuff, but we're going to get our friends on board and we're all going to do it together. And it's really effective. And as a side note, we'll try to make sure that people don't die in the process. There's no clarification as to, okay, so how are you going to mitigate? There's a sentence that says, sanctions, our policy should mitigate humanitarian impacts. No explanation as to how that's going to happen. And it's clear to me, at least watching it, that this is more, again, of a sort of PR campaign that allows the Biden administration to act like they are distinct from the previous administration because the people in this administration spent 4 years criticizing the previous one, right? That's the key. If you spend 4 years criticizing someone and then you do the exact same thing, you look stupid. So at some point, you have to pretend like you're different in some way. So they had this fabulous review, 7 pages in 10 months, and nothing about how the policies are actually ineffective, which Senator Ossoff pointed out. And the reason why that's so important is because they are far, far more ineffective than they are effective.
Hey, Assal,
Sorry.
what you just said is actually very profound because this is actually a pattern that the Biden administration has done because they had to sound like they're very anti-Trump when they was running. So in order to appease like the liberal base, they have to seem like they're opposing Trumpism without actually doing it. So they did the same thing regarding the border crisis, where they said, oh, we're going to do a review of Trump's border policies. And I remember when that was announced, there was headlines everywhere. Biden's going to review Trump's border policies. Biden's going to review Trump's border policies. Oh my God, this is amazing. And then they reviewed it and they're like, oh, we're going to keep it. So you see how they got the positive media out of doing that without actually making a change? That reminds me exactly what you referring to here. They did the same thing. They're like, oh, we're going to review drug prices. Oh, we're going to have a review on drug prices. Then they did the review. Nothing changed. So this is a pattern where they always said we're going to review this, and then they maintain the policy of the previous Republican administration, thus the country continue to shift to the right. But sorry, continue, Saul.
Which is really a policy of the previous Democratic administration, and then the previous Republican administration, and then the previous Democratic administration.
Yeah, I always joke around, and there's always a debate because I say that Joe Biden is like the 11th term of Ronald Reagan. And so it's like, is that accurate, or is that the 13th term of Nixon, or is it the 14th term of Lyndon Johnson? We can go back and back, but you guys see how the U.S. empire has a direction, the direction of global capitalism, the direction of imperialism, and it's not going to change. Any thoughts, Josanna and Peter? And I have one quick rapid fire story we can run. We wrap up.
I just feel like this capitalist right-wingers lie of like Joe Biden is better than Trump and everything. I mean, they were just ashamed with the way Trump spoke in international meetings, and now they have a person that also can't properly speak, but at least stays quieter and just keeps on repeating the policies. And when I see that picture of Biden in the church, and I said the nerve, the caucasity of being like sitting like I'm so humbly touched by the Almighty. And it's like, yeah. But what makes me angrier is the support from the UN, is the support from the European Union, is the support from Costa Rica for the sanctions against Nicaragua. So I keep on thinking, like, how can we build a way to stop the empire? We need international alliance. But even the UN is quick to, I mean, just support the US. And then, I mean, we need to see a way out of it. And I keep on searching this way out of it, this way to stop the empire, this way to stop. And the only way, I think, is to like, we need to break this machine. We here in the US, we need to cut the pieces of the machine. We need to break the machine. Like workers don't work, and so forth. But I'm gonna pass you because I'm like, because of the Iraq war, and I don't want to introduce the next topic just yet.
Well, yeah, I mean, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
I just want to say, because we're gonna wrap up here very soon. I definitely want to ask you, because we talked about this last yesterday. I saw someone was asking our takes on Colin Powell, because pretty much everything that we covered here on this panel, pretty much the crimes of the United States empire over the last 30 years. This is not hyperbolic to say pretty much every single decision you had Colin Powell, one way or another, when he was in a position of power, spearheading this in the 90s, when he was Secretary of State. And I want to get Assal. I saw with Assal and Peter. I know me and Josanna talked about this yesterday, but I just want to say this because it's kind of actually parroting the point I made yesterday regarding Colin Powell. I'm not giving condolences. These people are evil. We need to stop falling for the propaganda of feeling like we gotta prop up these people just because they was in a public position of power when they committed mass evil deeds. If you want your life to be celebrated in death, live a life full of honor. And there's actually a reason why we got to tell the truth about Colin Powell, because there's a coordinated effort to whitewash the war criminals once they leave public office and once they leave life. And the reason why they do that is because they want to normalize the crimes and behaviors of people like Colin Powell. Think about it. Do they eulogize and do they say rest in peace for a rapist? If a rapist or a murderer die, you're not going to have Nina Turner sending out a tweet saying my condolences to this rapist. When Weinstein died, right? Epstein, sorry. When Epstein died by suicide in prison, did Nina Turner, did Jamal Bowman send out a tweet that say rest in peace Epstein? No. Why didn't they do that? Because if they did that, they're normalizing what it means to be a sex trafficker, sex pest criminal. You see what I'm talking about here? You see how you normalize certain things? So why is there a coordinated push to normalize someone like Colin Powell? It's by design, because they want to steer culture in a certain direction. Now, one last thing I want to add, and I'll get Assal and Peter's thoughts on Colin Powell and his legacy, is look at, and this is why I rally against the bastardization of neoliberal identity politics. And I explain the proper use of identity politics, but think about it. Colin Powell was the first Black Secretary of State. He's the first Black Secretary of State who is responsible for the deaths of millions and the destabilization of the global South and the Middle East. And then you have Eric Holder, who was the first Black Attorney General, who presided over Wall Street when they illegally, emphasis on the word illegally, foreclosed on Black American homes. They literally broke the contract. And they did investigations, so they forced signatures. Like, people, it's widely underreported the white collar crimes Wall Street was responsible for would cause Black people to lose our wealth, let alone the entirety of the working class. Eric Holder literally gave them immunity for all their crimes. You see how they used the first Black Attorney General, the first Black Secretary of State, to do the bidding of white supremacy in the empire? That's the lesson I want people to leave with Colin Powell. Assal, Peter, I will start with Assal. Anything regarding Colin Powell that you guys want to add on?
Okay, I'll go first. I was thinking of this in terms of what Josanna just said. Like, what are we going to do? And I've always still believe we need organizations that can help out whatever communities need, but at the same time, spread information, educate people, because the main problem is ignorance. People don't know anything about politics because our media and educational systems are so bad. As an example, I read tons of stuff about politics, foreign policy, et cetera, et cetera. It was only yesterday that I learned about Colin Powell's full record. So I just knew him as, the patsy for the Bush administration, going in front of the UN and putting a very serious, statesman-like face on the propaganda push for war. That was the only thing I knew of him in terms of his crimes, right? It was only yesterday I found out that he was instrumental, or he played a part at least, in the cover-up of massacring innocent people in the war on Vietnam. So that was something I didn't know until yesterday. I also didn't know that he was also a part of the U.S. war on Central America and the war waged by the elite of people all throughout the Americas. So he was helping with the Contras in Nicaragua. I think also played some role in the actual genocide in Guatemala. But basically, just U.S. policy in the 80s against the poor of everywhere south of the U.S. border. So it's just, and of course there was Panama. These things people just don't know. That's not in the media system. It's not in the educational system. So absolutely everything you just said, Nick, about how we should treat war criminals, the kind of reception we should give them is absolutely true. And it goes right back to, what are we going to do? Number one, we have to educate people. We can't just assume that everyone knows everything that we know, or they know everything that's important. So a key part of mutual aid has to be educating people so that we can actually form organizations that are strong in their unity and in their numbers to do anything real, to make any sort of real change. I'll just pass it over to.
Yeah, well said, Peter. And I think the death of these war criminals presents a great opportunity to educate people on their crimes, because I learned a lot of stuff as well, like many things that you mentioned. And I saw a comment, I was trying to highlight it, but I lost it somehow. They mentioned how Colin Powell, and I saw the receipt. He was responsible for torturing villages in Vietnam, and he continued to be an advocate of that strategy, because he actually praised that strategy in a later interview. And he said he wants to see the United States repeat that kind of action. This is a psychopath of the highest order. So I'm not being an asshole, bash him in depth. I'm treating him the way that anyone would treat any other mass murderer, killer, because that's what he is. But so I'll let you add your thoughts in, Josanna, after that.
Well, first, I want to say I think what Peter was saying is really important, right? The idea that it's sort of easier to just sit here and, because it's so easy to criticize everything that happens. I mean, the sheer volume of hypocrisy is so much that, I mean, we could do this all day long. But we also have to always be thinking of, okay, but what's the point of critiquing it? What can we do to change it? And so if one of the issues, and he's absolutely right, is people's like access to information and education and all of that, then we have a role to play in being able to make sure that people know things, right? It's not just that the empire sort of continues the way that it does because everybody's on board. In fact, everybody's not on board, right? Even with the very little information we have, the majority of Americans don't agree with the number of troops we have abroad, with the fact that we use our militarism, how much we spend on the military, all of these things. But in terms of talking about Colin Powell specifically, obviously then here comes this like online debate about how you should talk about him and what's okay and what's not okay. And, I understand when people say, look, like he's more than just this incident. We'll just say that for right now. He's more than that. This is like a human being with a nuanced life, and, he's taken different stances, and you can agree with him in some places. Sure, I can. Yeah, there's stuff that Colin Powell has said that I agree with. My issue with this debate, though, is why we never give the same amount of humanity and nuance to our adversaries. Why are we the only human beings? By we, I don't know, I'm stretching. I'm using the term we loosely in the situation. But why is it when it's our military, when it's our presidents, when it's our anything, there's so much nuance and humanity in these people? It's adorable to watch George W. Bush having a mint, right? You have to humanize them while you are dehumanizing half the living world. So it's That's the problem. The problem is you want to humanize him, fine, humanize everybody else. But you're going to sit here and use his humanization as yet another tool of empire to say that it's okay that we do these things. Now, on top of that is the fact that he is a war criminal. There's no question to this fact. In fact, one of the things that we learned in the last 24 hours is that he had internal doubts about the information that he was presenting, but he never made it public. So if you have doubts, how do you help present a case that unleashes murder and hell on millions of people when you actually have doubts about it? If that is not in the service of empire, then I don't know what is. So yes, we should have a nuanced conversation about Colin Powell, because we should have a nuanced conversation about everything and everyone. If he's a human being, so is every other military leader in the world that we hate, for whatever reasons that we hate them. Us killing people is not nicer than other people killing people. It is literally the same act. So if we're going to have these conversations, then we should at least have the wherewithal to apply that to everybody. And in the case of Powell, I think the problem with whitewashing it is the same problem we have with whitewashing all of our war crimes, is that for some reason, we pretend that they're not criminal in nature. This is a crime that was committed. What criminal is like, well, but they're a really good dad? What? That has nothing to do with the crimes that they committed. That makes no sense. So we continuously fall into this trap again when it's our guys, and we humanize our own war criminals. Now, my last point about this is, why is any of this really important? Colin Powell has passed, okay? The problem is, when you never hold anyone accountable, that's why the crimes continue. We can commit war crimes forever because no one is ever held accountable. In a system that imprisons 25% of the human population, 25% of the prison population of the world, apparently we do believe in criminality and accountability, just not for our leaders who are carrying out mass murder on a global scale.
Yeah, amen. And I just wanted to correct myself. I misspoke earlier when saying that Colin Powell was involved in the genocide in Guatemala in the 80s. He was involved in supporting the terrorist Contras in Nicaragua. He actually made a statement saying he had doubts about Rios Montt, the dictator running for election there. And that kind of goes to what Assal was saying about his doubts about the evidence, the fabricated evidence for WMD in Iraq. So there is this humanization of these people. And I think Kareem and I could talk about this for hours, about the psychology of these people, what's going on inside their heads when they justify atrocities, but then they have doubts about the morality of that. But yeah, I just wanted to correct what I said earlier.
That was such a perfectly well said statement by both of you guys. I want to get Josanna in here. I know we was having a good time yesterday, ripping on Colin Powell. Any thoughts regarding the subject of war criminals and the rehabilitation of awful people?
Well, I would just repeat what I said yesterday. I think for a war criminal, for a terrorist, for a torture, a death at 86 years old, it's a light punishment. I want more. That said, I wanted to just say, I think the Black community in the US especially, because they are born and raised in the imperial core of the world, they have to be wary of this is the first Black person doing this. This is the first Black person doing that. You have to see the error. Why is it the first Black person only in the 20th century? I mean, we've been here longer. We've been here since the beginning of times. So why am I proud that this is the first Black president? Well, that's a problem. We should be in the streets because there's no Black president. We should be in the streets, there's no Black secretary. We should be in the streets overthrowing white supremacy. But getting consolation from the fact that this is the first Black and now I can look up to them. And that's my discussion about representation. So I will look up to them and I will mirror Colin Powell's example. And I cannot criticize him for being a war criminal. Because like that's the example that we brought yesterday, and I said, Assal and Peter, that Jay-Z is a man with a lot of money but no balls, just like one of my cats. I cut it because like, yeah, because what happens is like, oh, it's 500 years of oppression, and finally the white man is giving me an opportunity to be part of that circle, so I will quiet myself down and I won't criticize so I can keep my coin and my power. You have no power the moment you sell your soul. Your soul's lost, your power is gone. And that's where I see here when, and I'm bringing up what CJ said yesterday, when all those black people that made it are saying that if one of us is there, all of us is there. And meanwhile, we always starving all around the world. It's a lie. It's a lie to keep this machine running and quieting people. They're losing their right to fight against a system that is oppressive and it's oppressing all of us, selling their souls for coins. So I think we as Black people should be wary of, this is the first Black person to do this. Well, this is the first Black person to be a war criminal, and you're gonna follow his footsteps? Like,
What's up,
I'm gonna
Josanna?
pass you, Nick.
What's that? We always have a good time on these conversations. These international leftist coalition panels have become a weekly thing. So make sure you guys check us out next week. Kareem will join us again next week. So I look forward to having him in our presence again. Josanna, Saul, Peter, any last things you guys want to say? Any last things you want to plug before you wrap up?
Yes, I do have things. So I'm very proud friend of Quaker Socialists. She's been hooking me up with very
Love
nice
Quakers.
people.
Love
Yes.
Quaker Socialists.
I'm like, I can't, like, I cannot even believe what did I do to deserve that. But anyways, there will be the people from the Medcare for All March, the organization. They will do an Occupy Pfizer, and I will be promoting until we get there. They're doing an Occupy Pfizer here in New York in November 15th from 8:30 a.m. to 10:30 p.m. Oh, sorry, 8:30 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. Just 2 hours, and we need as many volunteers that we can have there. Also, if you are supporting the general strike and you're looking for ways and you have any questions and you want to learn some, my sister Ultraviolet, she has a Discord, so follow her on Twitter. I think it's Rex the Patriarchy, and her Twitter Evie is Frida Kahlo. Her name is Ultraviolet, so she has all the information. She's getting together a coalition so we can support mutual aid for the workers that are not working, supporting the workers that are already on strike. The last thing I just want to say hi and how much I love my family from the MAD Revolutionary Collective. They're all here supporting, and all the people in the comments, I love you. I'm very happy to be here with you. Mwah.
So, Peter, anything you want to say before we wrap up?
I don't have anything to plug. I just want to thank Nick, you obviously, for providing this platform and really for creating such an amazing platform in such a short amount of time. It's a feat that we should acknowledge, and just thank you for having us again.
It's always a pleasure, Saul. Thank you, Peter. Anything you want to say, Peter?
Yeah, just second what Assal just said, and on what Josanna said, like, people who are in the US, you're in the belly of the beast, you're in the imperial core. Like, it's incredibly important to get organized and educate people. So think big, like try to grow organizations, try to spread as much knowledge as you can, get people on board so that they actually come out to protests, to whatever, sort of mutual aid activities you're doing. And also like allow, like, create some way for people around the world to participate, like donating money or whatever that you need. Like, there are a lot of people around the world who understand that change in the US is actually one of the best ways to create change in their own countries. So, reach out, come up with some ways for people abroad, like myself and Kareem, to help out as well.
Sure.
Just before I pass to you, Nick, I just wanted to say that cat is 100% anarchist. Kiko was right. Every single cat in this house.
That's super important. Thank you guys for watching. For me, make sure you guys just check out all our uploads, all our live streams. We upload every single day. Tomorrow is Compton CJ's day, so we're gonna have Straight Out Politics, the New Left Coalition podcast is tomorrow. So just hit the bell if you're new, like, subscribe. We got content every day. And on Thursday, we have a roundtable. Friday, I'm gonna have the Bank Sisters. They making strong content from a Black female perspective. I want to amplify them on Friday. So we got a lot of great stuff coming. Also, check out my new article on my Substack. Our worst fears of the Biden administration has come true. I'm going to do a breakdown stream talking about that article here pretty soon. I took a break from writing for a while because FHL took so much of my time. But I got a lot of great articles I'm going to start releasing soon. So make sure you guys check out my Substack, Progressive Martial Artist Substack. Check that out. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. Stay in the fight, my friends. For Hampton Leftists, sign out.